Hey everyone, welcome back. We're diving deep today into 2 Thessalonians.
Oh, yeah.
Chapters 1 through 3.
Excellent.
It's a letter from Paul
Okay.
to this young church that was forming in Thessalonica.
Right.
And, this community was facing some pretty serious persecution for
Yeah.
their faith.
They're just getting started and bam.
Yeah, and here's the thing.
Yeah.
Their faith was actually growing stronger.
I know. Isn't that
In
wild?
the midst of all this opposition.
That's resilience.
Like, how is that even possible?
Well, it really speaks to the human spirit, right? To hold on to hope,
Yeah.
even when things feel impossible.
I think all of us
Yeah.
could learn a thing or two about that.
Absolutely.
Especially when we face, our own challenges and setbacks.
Well, Paul reminds us
Yeah.
that suffering isn't pointless.
Okay.
He emphasizes that God sees our struggles
Okay.
and will ultimately bring justice.
Mm-hmm.
Think of it this way. It's like a balancing of the scales. Those who inflict pain will face consequences,
Mm-hmm.
and those who have suffered will find relief when Christ returns.
That image of Christ returning with the angels,
Right.
that's pretty intense.
Powerful imagery.
It is. But
Yeah.
but it seems like, in the meantime,
Yeah.
Paul also has some pretty practical advice for us.
Absolutely. He talks a lot about
Yeah.
discerning truth,
Okay.
which is something we can all relate to.
Oh, yeah. Big time.
Right.
Especially these days.
We are bombarded with information, opinions, and even outright lies.
Yeah, and Paul knew that the Thessalonians were grappling with false teachings
Oh, yeah.
about the second coming,
Uh-huh.
with some people claiming that it had already happened.
Right.
I mean, can you imagine the chaos
Oh, it would have been just mayhem.
that must have caused?
Absolutely.
I mean,
And so Paul urges them to stay grounded in God's truth.
okay, so how do we do that?
Well,
In a world where,
yeah.
Everybody has an opinion and a platform to share it.
And everyone thinks they're right.
Yeah, it's not like we have a direct line to Paul to fact check everything.
Well, that's where it gets even more interesting.
Okay.
Paul doesn't give a list of do's and don'ts.
Okay.
He encourages us to develop our own discernment,
Uh-huh.
to test everything against the solid foundation of Scripture.
So it's like a
Imagine building a house
solid foundation.
on a shaky foundation. It's not
Yeah.
going to last very long, is it?
Right.
Our faith, our lives need to be built on something much stronger,
Okay.
something that can withstand the storms of doubt, confusion, and even persecution.
So I was thinking about that, and I was reading chapter 3,
Yeah.
and it was really interesting to me because Paul says,
Mm-hmm.
if anyone is not willing to work, let him not eat.
Ooh.
That seems a little harsh, don't you think?
Well, it's certainly a statement that grabs your attention.
Yeah.
And it's easy to misinterpret
Okay.
if we don't understand the context.
Okay, yeah, what was the context?
So Paul wasn't writing a universal rule book for all of humanity.
Okay.
He was addressing a specific issue in the Thessalonian church.
Okay.
It seems some people were using the anticipation of Christ's return
Mm-hmm.
as an excuse to be idle
Oh, so they're just like
and stop working,
sitting around waiting.
relying on others to provide for them.
Gotcha. So it was more about personal responsibility
Precisely.
and contributing to the community,
Yes.
not just being lazy.
Exactly.
I get it. Okay.
Paul understood that idleness could lead to both spiritual and communal problems.
Oh, boy.
It's easy to become discouraged
Yeah.
and lose motivation
Yeah.
when you're not actively engaged in something meaningful.
It makes sense.
And when some people are carrying more than their fair share of the load,
Yeah.
it can create resentment and division.
So how do we apply this
Well,
today?
that's a great question.
I mean, we're not facing
Yeah.
the same pressures as the early Christians, but
Right.
but I think we can all relate to the temptation
Absolutely.
to just check out.
To let other people handle things.
Yeah. Just wait for something better to come along.
And I think that's what makes Paul's message so relevant.
Yeah.
Even centuries later,
Mm-hmm.
he's calling us to something deeper
Okay.
than just punching a clock or completing a to-do list.
Mm-hmm.
He's inviting us to find purpose and meaning in our work.
I love that. But,
Yeah.
it can be tough
Sure.
to find that kind of purpose
Of course.
when you're stuck in a job you hate.
Yeah. Or
Ah.
dealing with overwhelming demands.
Yeah, you're right.
And Paul doesn't shy away from the challenges of living out our faith in a complex and often difficult world.
Right.
He knows that staying steadfast in doing good requires effort, discipline, and honestly, a healthy dose of grace.
So how do we cultivate that kind of steadfastness
Wow.
in our own lives?
That's something.
And how do we avoid
Yeah.
falling into that trap
Hmm.
of idleness or becoming a burden on others. We'll dig into that
We'll explore that more.
and more right after this.
Sounds good.
So before the break, we were talking about
Yes.
finding purpose in our work
Ah,
and resisting, that
Yeah.
pull of idleness.
absolutely.
But I was curious, does
Yeah.
Paul just give these,
Why?
broad strokes?
Oh, he gets pretty specific.
Okay.
In fact, there's this whole section where
Yeah.
he calls out certain folks
Okay.
who are causing trouble in the Thessalonian church.
Oh, really?
He describes them as disorderly,
Uh-huh.
idle, and busybodies.
It's funny.
Yeah.
Some things never change, right?
It's like he's describing that coworker we all have,
Right.
the one who's always doing the pot.
So what was going on here?
Well, it seems
Why was Paul so concerned?
they were doing a whole lot of not working,
Okay.
gossiping,
Uh-huh.
meddling in other people's business,
So they're disrupting.
disrupting the peace and unity of the community.
And this was already a community.
And remember,
You think it's fake?
this was a community already facing external persecution
Yeah.
for their faith.
So these internal conflicts.
So these internal conflicts must have been incredibly draining.
Yeah, it makes you realize
It sounds.
how fragile unity can be,
Absolutely.
even when...
Even when everyone is supposedly on the same team.
Right.
And Paul understood this.
Yeah.
He'd actually addressed this behavior before
Okay.
when he was with them in person.
Okay.
But it seems some folks needed a reminder.
So what was his advice?
He urged them to get to work,
Okay.
mind their own business,
Uh-huh.
and to contribute to the community
Okay.
instead of causing chaos.
So it wasn't just about,
But here's what I find fascinating.
Okay.
He doesn't just address the troublemakers.
Okay.
He also speaks to the rest of the church
Okay.
and encourages them to be patient and supportive.
So it's not just about calling out bad behavior.
It's about cultivating a culture of grace and understanding.
That's such an important reminder.
It is.
Especially today,
Yeah.
when it's so easy to just write people off,
To label them as good or bad and be done with it.
Yeah. What if Paul were writing to us today?
That's a question worth pondering.
What kinds of behaviors would he challenge us
I think Paul would encourage us
to address?
to examine our own hearts,
Okay.
to ask ourselves if we're truly living out the values of love, humility, and service.
And he might challenge us.
You might challenge us to be more patient with those who are struggling,
Okay.
more willing to extend grace and offer support.
And also to remember,
And he might also remind us that we're all works in progress.
yeah, none of us.
None of us have arrived at some perfect state of spiritual maturity.
Right. And that's actually,
And that's actually quite liberating, isn't it?
it is.
It means we don't have to have all the answers.
Yeah.
We don't have to pretend to be perfect.
We can just embrace
We can embrace the messiness of
Yep.
growth,
in ourselves and in others.
both in ourselves and in others.
I love that. So we've got enduring with hope,
Yes.
discerning truth, working with purpose, and
And cultivating
cultivating a spirit of
grace and understanding
grace and understanding
within our community.
within our communities.
Yeah.
Anything else jump out at you?
You know what strikes me
The next section.
is how Paul weaves together these practical instructions with this larger vision of hope.
So he's constantly reminding us.
He never loses sight of the fact that Christ is coming back,
Right.
that this world is not our ultimate home.
We haven't really talked much about the second coming,
Right.
but it's like this undercurrent.
It's this undercurrent running through the entire letter.
Yeah, that gives meaning and purpose.
It's what gives meaning and purpose to all these seemingly mundane things, like working discerning truth and building strong relationships.
But how do we live in that tension?
That's a great question.
How do we hold on to that hope
Yeah.
when things feel bleak, when it seems like darkness is winning? And how do we make sure that that hope
Right.
doesn't just
An
become
important question.
an excuse for passivity, for just waiting around?
These are questions that have challenged theologians and philosophers for centuries.
It's for someone else to fix the world's problems.
Luckily, Paul offers some guidance.
Okay, so we're back,
Right.
and we're going to tackle these big questions about
Oh,
hope and action.
yeah.
It's easy to get caught up
Right.
in the day-to-day and lose sight of
Absolutely.
the bigger picture.
The long view.
Yeah, but Paul in 2 Thessalonians,
Yeah.
he seems to effortlessly weave together
It's beautiful.
these everyday instructions with this incredible sense of anticipation for Christ's return.
It's a masterful balance.
So how does that translate into concrete actions?
Well,
I mean, should we all quit our jobs, sell our possessions,
that's a great question.
and just sit on a mountaintop?
Many people throughout history have grappled with that one.
Waiting for the trumpets to sound.
Yeah, but I don't think that's what Paul is advocating for.
Okay.
Remember, he emphasized working with purpose,
Yeah.
building strong communities,
Right.
and discerning truth.
So it's not about escaping the world,
Right.
but about
It's about living in it differently,
living in it differently
with a different set of priorities.
with a different set of priorities. But let's
Yeah.
be honest,
It's tough.
waiting for something
It is.
that feels so far off
It's hard.
can be hard.
Yeah.
How do we stay
Yeah.
motivated?
Paul addresses that too.
Okay.
He actually prays for the Thessalonians.
Okay.
And I think it's a prayer that we can all echo for ourselves today.
What's the prayer?
He says, "May the Lord direct your hearts into God's love and Christ's perseverance."
So it's not about our own willpower.
It's about tapping into something much bigger than ourselves.
Yeah, we need God's love to fuel our hope,
We do.
to give us the strength to keep going.
To keep going when we'd rather give up.
Yeah, when we'd rather just throw in the towel.
Yeah. And we can draw inspiration from Christ's example of perseverance.
Okay.
Even in the face of immense suffering, he remained steadfast, focused on his mission.
You know, we've talked a lot about discerning truth
Yes.
and identifying false teachings.
Uh-huh.
But what if we're the ones who are off track?
Oh, that's such an important question
What if we're the ones
to ask ourselves.
that Paul would be calling out?
It takes a good dose of humility and self-awareness.
Yeah. Are we open to correction?
Are we willing to listen to feedback, even if it's hard to hear?
Are we more concerned with
Yeah.
being right or with...
Are we more concerned with being right or with being in right relationship with God and others?
Oh, those are some
Yeah.
right tough questions.
Yeah,
But I guess that's part of what this deep dive is all about.
I think so.
Challenging ourselves to see things.
See things from a different perspective.
From a different perspective, to grow in our understanding of
To
God's truth.
grow in our understanding of God's truth and how it applies to our lives.
So we've covered a lot of ground today.
We have.
Enduring with hope, discerning truth,
Yes.
working with purpose, building strong communities,
Yes.
preparing for Christ's return,
It's a lot.
all while cultivating humility and a willingness to grow.
It's a tall order.
I'm feeling inspired.
Me too. And remember, you're not alone in this journey.
That's right.
You have God's love, Christ's example,
Ah.
and the support of fellow believers to guide you.
So before we wrap up,
Yeah.
if Paul were writing to us today,
Mm-hmm.
what specific work do you think he would encourage us to keep doing?
That's a great question to ponder.
Even when it's hard.
It's going to be different for each person,
Yeah.
but I would encourage you to consider what brings you life.
Okay.
What connects you to something bigger than yourself?
Mm-hmm.
What makes a difference in the world? And whatever that is, don't give up.
Don't give up.
Keep pursuing it, even when it's challenging.
That's fantastic advice. Thank you for joining us today as we take this deep dive into 2 Thessalonians.
My pleasure.
We encourage you to explore these chapters yourself and see what resonates with you.
Absolutely.
Until next time.